logical variation. They had a child who had retreated into a world they could not reach. A child who screamed at touches that should have been comforting, rejected food that should have been nourishing, and looked through them as if they were not there. And they needed an explanation, because human beings always need an explanation. The fairy story was the one their culture gave them, and they took it. And here is something that cuts both ways, something historians still argue about fiercely. The changeling belief, as destructive as it could be, also sometimes functioned as a form of protection. If your child was a changeling, it was not your fault. Your bloodline was not cursed. You had not sinned. God was not punishing you. The fairies had chosen your child specifically because it was beautiful and healthy, and that was precisely why they wanted it. The child was desirable, not cursed. The changeling label could redirect blame away from the family and onto supernatural forces, which in a small medieval village where reputation was survival was no small thing. Some scholars argue the changeling belief actually preserved certain disabled children's lives by giving communities a framework where the child's differences were explicable and, in their way, meaningful. Others argue that this is a generous reading, and that the tests, the fire, the iron, the exposure on cold hillsides speak entirely and devastatingly for themselves. The truth, as always, lives somewhere in between, somewhere in the smoky light of that cottage where the woman sits beside the cradle and weeps, and the child rocks back and forth. Back and forth, in a rhythm that is ancient and unknowable and entirely his own. You sit with her for a moment. You cannot change anything. This is history. But you can notice, as you rise to leave, that the boy has arranged his pebbles in a perfect spiral on the floor, and that it is, in its strange way, beautiful. You step back out into the village. The air is cold, the stars are very bright, and somewhere, not far away, a bell is ringing. Follow it. The bell rings again, clearer now, pulling you forward through the cold dark toward whatever comes next in this long, strange history. The bell rings at midnight, and it rings at 3 in the morning, and it rings at 6, and at 9, and at noon, and at 3 in the afternoon, and at 6 in the evening, and once more at nightfall, 8 times a day, every week, every month, every year, for centuries. The bell does not care if you're tired. The bell does not care if you're sick. It rings regardless every time without mercy or pause. The bell does not care if it is Christmas, or if the plague is at the gate, or if the king has ridden up demanding hospitality. The bell rings, and when the bell rings, you move. You're walking up a muddy path toward a Benedictine monastery somewhere in Central Europe. It could be the 11th century, the 12th, or the 13th. The rule of St. Benedict governs every minute of life inside these walls. It was written in the 6th century and barely changed for 1,000 years. That is not a typo. 1,000 years of the same schedule. The same expectations, the same rhythm of prayer and work and silence. Imagine writing an employee handbook still followed word for word after 1,000 years. That is what Benedict of Nursia accomplished, and whether he knew it or not, he may have accidentally created one of the most autism-friendly environments in human history. Here is the schedule. You wake at midnight for matins, the longest prayer service of the day, psalms and readings in the dark while the world sleeps. Then you go back to bed briefly until 3 in the morning when the bell calls you to Lauds, then sleep again until prime at 6. Then terce at 9, then sext at noon, then none at 3. Prime at 6 marks the true beginning of the working day for every monk. Then vespers at 6, then compline at nightfall, the last prayer of the day, after which the great silence begins, and no one speaks until morning. Between prayer hours you work, you eat, you read. Everything happens at the same time every day, governed by the bell, structured down to the quarter hour. The Benedictine motto is ora et labora, pray and work. The entire architecture of monastic life is designed to eliminate uncertainty and remove the need for decision-making. It creates a world in which you always know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and exactly when you are supposed to be doing it. Now, if you know anything about autism, your ears just perked up. What you have just described is a rigidly structured environment with predictable routines and minimal social demands. Long periods of silence, repetitive activities, clear rules, and a bell that tells you exactly when to transition from one activity to the next. This is essentially a therapeutic environment designed by a 6th century Italian saint who had never heard the word autism and would not hear it for another 1400 years. Think about what monastic life removes. It removes the chaos of the marketplace, the unpredictability of secular social life, the constant demand to read social cues, and the constant demand to navigate complex relationships, make small talk, and perform the 1,000 tiny acts of social theatre that neurotypical people do without thinking. In the monastery you do not need to make small talk. In fact, you are forbidden from making small talk. Many Benedictine houses observed strict silence outside prayer hours. Even where conversation was permitted, it was regulated, purposeful, and brief. Idle chatter was a sin. The rules handled the weight of every social interaction, so you did not have to. Think about what a relief that would be for someone who has spent their entire life struggling with conversation, who never knows when to speak or what to say. or how to read the expression on another person's face. In the monastery, that struggle simply vanishes. The rules handle everything, every hour, every day. The work that monks did, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, brewing beer, crafting illuminated letters, these were repetitive and detail-oriented solitary tasks that rewarded focus and patience. Tasks demanding the ability to do the same thing, over and over and over with exacting precision, for years on end, without complaint or boredom. The primary intellectual labour of medieval monasticism was essentially a special interest turned into a vocation. You find one thing, you do it deeply, you do it beautifully. You do it for God, and nobody tells you that you are too intense or too focused, or that you need to lighten up or be more social. They tell you that your focus is holy. They tell you that your dedication is a form of prayer. They tell you that your quality of mind makes you blessed inside these walls. Historians still argue whether monasteries deliberately attracted neurodivergent individuals, or whether it was simply a happy accident of structure. There is evidence on both sides. Medieval families often gave their unusual children to the church, a practice called oblation, in which a child was dedicated to a monastery at a very young age. Sometimes as young as 5 or 6. The reasons were varied: too many children, not enough food, a desire for spiritual merit, or a child simply too different for village life. The monastery was a socially acceptable place to put a child who was different, and unlike the fairy hill or the hot shovel, it was a place where that child might actually thrive. On the other hand, monastic life was genuinely hard, and not everyone who entered adapted well. The historical record is full of monks who struggled, who ran away, who broke the rules, who fought with their brothers and were driven mad by the silence and the repetition. For every monk who found peace in the routine, there was probably another who found it suffocating. The monastery was not a paradise for all, and we should be careful about romanticising it. Not every mind found peace within those walls. But here is a quirky tidbit. Many Benedictine houses developed elaborate systems of hand signals to communicate during periods of silence. At Cluny there were over 100 standardised signs. Bread, wine, fish, book, candle, come, go, stop. The monks created a visual communication system that bypassed the complexities of spoken conversation and reduced it to its most concrete elements. If you struggled with the ambiguity of spoken language, with tone and implication, and the unspoken rules of conversation, a system of clear, unambiguous hand signals would be a godsend. Literally. You're inside the monastery now. The walls are thick stone, cool even in summer, and the air smells of beeswax and old wood and something edible. The cloister is a square of open sky surrounded by covered walkways, and monks move through it silently, their sandals whispering on the stone. Nobody looks at you, nobody greets you, nobody expects anything of you except that you be quiet, follow the bell and do your work. The bell rings. It is time for sext, the midday prayer. You follow the monks into the chapel and stand in the dim golden light. Around you, voices rise in plainchant, the same melody sung in this same place at this same hour for hundreds of years, so predictable and so beautiful. But you feel something in your chest loosen, some knot of anxiety you did not even know was there. This is what structure feels like when it is not punishment. This is what routine feels like when it is not prison. This is what the medieval world accidentally offered to minds that craved exactly this. The chant ends, the silence returns, and the bell, faithful as always, tells you what comes next. What comes next is the scriptorium. Follow the corridor to the left, through the heavy oak door into the room where the real magic happens. This is where it all began. The room is not large. It is long and narrow, with high windows on one side that let in as much light as a medieval architect could manage. Which is to say, not quite enough. You will squint here. Everyone squints here. After a few years, most monks in this room will need reading stones. Polished pieces of beryl or quartz that magnify the text. The medieval ancestors of reading glasses. Some of them will go half blind. They do not stop working. There are wooden desks arranged in rows, each one angled like a drafting table, and at each desk sits a monk with his head bowed low over a piece of vellum. Vellum is animal skin,